Great. So in terms of the agenda for today's session, we're going to start with some welcome and introductions, and we're really happy to have here today with us Deputy Mayor Cllr Bramble and Cllr Kennedy, who are here to give us a bit of background on themselves and on the grants program. We're going to go into more detail on the grants program this year and the grants that we have available. We're going to go through a bit about the program and the practicalities of the application process. And we're going to finish off with some key information and next steps. And this is quite a broad context setting, getting to know you session for our program as a whole. And we'll go into detail in the slides about individual application help sessions that we have for each of our funds. So in terms of housekeeping, I'm sure everyone is aware by this point, but just keep yourself on mute the whole time. That would be really, really helpful to keep our presenters focused. A copy of these slides and the report will be shared by the end of next week. And what we will include in that pack will be the recording and the slides for all of our information sessions. So if you're unable to join today or any of those in the future, don't worry at all. They will all come into your inbox and you can watch them at your leisure. We'll aim to answer questions at the end of this session, so please feel free to put any in the chat box, and wherever we can, we might respond to them in the chat box. But then at the end, we'll also try and make sure that all the questions are answered. If we don't have time or we don't get through to them, absolutely feel free to email us with any questions. We are available over the phone as well, and we're absolutely thrilled to answer any questions that you might have about the program and make it easier for you to apply. So I just wanted to quickly go over some key terms that will be used throughout this program, and that might be for people who are new to our program, and it might be for people who are new to grants and grant making in general. So when we say VCS, we're just referring to the voluntary and community sector. And obviously, as the council, we're typically referring to the voluntary and community sector in Hackney. We might use the terms organisation and group interchangeably. They mean the same thing, except for specifically we're referring to structured groups of residents. And structured groups of residents are unconstituted, quite informal groups of residents, and they might be applying for community chests. So this might be a group of residents who live on the same street, who want to run an event or something along those lines. When we say fund or scheme, we're using these terms interchangeably just to describe the different strands of funding available in our program. And then request, we might say your request for funding, and this is used interchangeably with like your application or your project application. So I'll give a quick introduction to the team, but everyone's going to be speaking today, so everyone can introduce themselves in more detail if they wish as we go on. So we are a community partnerships team. We sit in the policy and strategic delivery service of the Chief Executive Directorate at the London Borough of Hackney Council. So Claire is our strategic lead, working on strategic relationships with the voluntary and community sector in the borough. Moyo is our grants and investment officer. I am covering for Lisa as the grants and investment manager until May. She's on maternity leave. Sue is a strategic delivery officer who works in our team and supports us with our grant making. And Tom is our senior grants and investment officer. So our team is responsible for all aspects of the grant program, including applications, assessments, contracting, payments, and then eventually for those who go on to be funded, working individually with those organisations to support them in anything that we can be of help in when it comes to using and managing your grant. So I'm now going to hand over to Cllr Kennedy, who's going to say a few words about the program.
Welcome everybody. I'm Councillor Cllr Kennedy. I'm the cabinet member for voluntary and community sector, as well as adults and health and culture here at the London Borough of Hackney. Thank you so much for tuning in. Brilliant to see so many of you on the call. Absolutely fantastic. Look, we're really proud to be running another huge grants program for the next year, £2.8 million, just about the same amount as we ran last year. We made 104 different grants during the course of last year that made up that £2.8 million. So that's right across our specialist grants, our infrastructure grants, advice project grants, the community chest grants, young people, because we administer now the children and young people's grants. We're delighted to be joined by Deputy Mayor Bramble, who will talk a bit more about those just after me, and also we administer the public health grants. So 104 grants, reaching more than we know 150,000 beneficiaries all across Hackney, and those organisations, your organisations delivering those grants, 3/4 of you are what we call equity-led organisations. You're led by people from our marginalised communities. That's absolutely what our grant making process is about. It's about supporting those small organisations. Just as another indicator of that, of how close to your communities you are, is that nearly 3/4 of you, of those organisations delivering that grants, have an annual income of below £250,000. So your small to medium scale voluntary sector organisations. That's what our project is about, supporting those community-based, community-led organisations that help the people in our communities who need it most. We have a wonderful team who go out and review all the work you're doing. The reports that myself, the other cabinet members get back are that we have a thriving, healthy and really hard-working voluntary sector. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. And of course, you're supported by our grants team here at the London Borough of Hackney. We support all voluntary and community sector organisations, whether you receive a grant from us or not. Whoever funds you, however you're funded, we're here to support you. Led by Claire Whitney, who you'll hear from, and then you'll also be hearing from Moyo Adeneye, Lisa Atami, and Sue Brown and Thomas Shaw. My thanks to those officers for the great work they do in partnership with you. And I'd like to hand over now. We're delighted to have Deputy Mayor Bramble with us. Deputy Mayor Bramble.
Thank you so much, Councillor Kennedy, for that warm introduction and talking about the importance that our community groups play in the work that we're doing. I really want to thank Councillor Kennedy and officers for the work that they've done in terms of the grants process for children and young people. And for those of you that don't know, what we did is we ran a pilot where we used a different system around grants for children and young people. And because of its success, we are doing that again. So if I give you a bit of context, children and young people have a allotted system, and we had lot 1 and 2. And what we found is that many of the organisations were bidding for both lot 1 and lot 2. And then when myself and Councillor Kennedy, when we were out in the community, we were hearing very much from some of our providers that actually that system wasn't working for them. And when you're a smaller organisation and you don't have someone full-time to do bids, it's not that you can't do the work, it's more around capacity. So I tasked officers with the challenge, well, how can we make it more accessible for those organisations that we know that we have the in-reach, but don't have the capacity to put in those bigger bids? And what happened is that we closed one of the lot in bids, so we just have one lot for organisations to bid for, and we now have a grant system. And that means smaller organisations are able to bid for grants, so we're getting money to community groups that have the impact with our children and young people a lot sooner. So some of the aims of that programme is to enable more of a collaborative approach between us as a council and you as the voluntary sector, to provide good value for money, where we're understanding with the flexible funding models will allow you as organisations to adapt the needs to those children and young people that you're delivering those services to. Remember, a lot of times young people and their families will go to you as the voluntary sector because you have that trusted relationships, and because you've been supporting them, you understand the support that they need. And ultimately, it's the value that you add for the children and young people in our borough by supporting them through a thriving voluntary sector partnership. And that enables us to have innovative solutions to be able to respond to the need of our children and young people. Thank you. I will hand over to Cllr Whitney.
Hello.
At that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Cllr Bramble. Hello, I'm Cllr Whitney. I'm a strategic lead and I support the grants team in the work that they do to deliver the grants programme. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about our strategic plan and why we fund the voluntary and community sector, and the priorities, really trying so that you understand where our priorities come from, and that's what we're looking for in terms of the applications that come from yourselves. So Council sets out its priorities in a strategic plan. We agreed our last strategic plan in 2022. It's up on our website if you wanted to have a read. It's not too long. It's fairly readable, quite a short document. So if you really want to have a good understanding of the Council's wider priorities, you can have a look on our website. I don't need to tell you that prospects for the economy are not great. We are in an ongoing cost of living crisis. Demand for our services is becoming much greater and more intense, and I know that's the experience in the voluntary and community sector as well. The more our residents struggle, the greater the demand for council services and support. And so the pressures of inflation, potential further government cuts, this is making it more and more expensive and harder for the council to deliver those services. And our strategic plan is really there to help us respond to these challenges. So it's our way of knowing exactly what we need to be doing with all the challenges that the council's facing in the current environment. If you can go on to the next slide, which was so. This is, fortunately, it reflects what Cllr Bramble and Cllr Kennedy have been saying. We use the priorities in our strategic plan to refresh our overall grant programme priorities, which you can see here. And they really have retained the focus on the strengths and expertise and knowledge within the VCS and the trust that residents have in local organisations. And that's why we want to work with you, and that's why we want to invest in your organisations. We know by focusing on these programme priorities, we can fund the sector to provide support to residents that was, whilst it's responding to need in our communities, and that's what we're all trying to do, it's also developing strengths and assets within the communities, which is much more difficult for the council to achieve. And so these are why these are our programme priorities, because we really need the support and help from the voluntary and community sector to respond to specific needs, use your expertise, your knowledge, your reach, but also to be able to provide strengths to the community and use the assets within communities to give communities resilience. So I'll pass on to my colleague, and I'm going to be passing over to Moyo.
Thank you, Cllr. I'm Moyo Adeneye, and I'm a grants and investment officer in the team. The table that is on the screen gives an overview of the grants program open for application this year. This will be discussed in further detail shortly, but in terms of an overview, we will have a project grants program which has two strands: general projects and children's and young people's funds. Grants of up to £20,000 are available. As with our last year's program, organization we need to have an annual income of between £10,000 and £1 million in order to apply for the project. There will be, to apply for the grant, there will be one round of funding. The application opens today with grants awarded from April 2024. As our community chess program, it will remain similar to previous years, and we will continue to have 4 rounds of funding in the year. Organization must have at least an income of less than £10,000 to apply for the community chess grant. This is so that we can focus on ensuring that the community chess grants reach grassroots groups who the funding for the community chess is intending to support. We will continue with the earlier Hackney elements of community chess grants funding projects that aim to get people more active and create better health. Next slide, please. Thank you. This table on the screen as well outlines our closed schemes that are not currently open for applications. The first is the specialist grants, then the community infrastructures, which were awarded in 2022 and 2023 for organizations that provide continual preventive support to highly vulnerable people in Hackney. This follows a 2-stage application process. These are also 3-year. They are funded for 3 years. We will now talk about each of the open grant schemes in further detail. I'll hand over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Moya. I'm sure the Senior Grants and Investment Officer in the team. So yeah, basically, as Claire was saying earlier, our 2 programme priorities that underpin the whole of the grants programme are the 2 priorities you see, which reflect the Council's strategic plan. For our project grants, we're also looking for grants that support the following 6 equality aims. These were developed initially as part of the Children and Young People's programme, but were adopted to all of our project grants last year. The 6 equality aims are identity and belonging, being healthy, making a positive contribution, achieving economic and financial well-being, enjoying and achieving, and being safe. So in terms of the grants themselves, the purpose of the project grants is to fund short-term activities that are working towards the programme priorities and the equality aims. There's a specific fund for children and young people, but the application form, process and criteria are the same for both of these strands. In terms of the essential criteria and conditions, organisations, as we said before, must have an annual income between 10,000 and 1 million. Organisations can apply for up to £20,000 for projects either 1 or 2 years in length, depending on the fund. And 80% of the project's beneficiaries must be Hackney residents. Organisations may only apply for 1 grant in this strand between project grants for children and young peoples. In terms of the ones we funded for before, for project grants, we've funded a work programme for migrant and refugee backgrounds to improve their English proficiency, earn accredited English qualifications and build their employability and public speaking skills, and a night shelter programme for homeless people for routes out of homelessness. For our CYP grants, our children and young peoples, we've funded before a mentoring programme for Black teenage girls to develop the skills, confidence, well-being, resilience and independence to take tangible, positive steps towards prosperous futures. And also a free theatre training opportunity for young people to create a play with and for primary school children, celebrating Hackney's diverse cultures. I'll pass on to you now, Sue. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Tom. I'm going to talk, my name's Sue Brown, I'm a Strategic Delivery Officer working from within the grants team. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Community Chest Fund. The purpose of the Community Chest Grants is to fund short-term or one-off activities working towards the grants priorities that have just been mentioned. So we have a generic Community Chest Grants and also funding ring fence for healthier Hackney applications. Applicant organisations have to have an annual income of less than 10,000 per year to be eligible for this funding. And the project should be for short-term activities or one-off projects no longer than a year in length, and at least 80% of the beneficiaries must be Hackney residents. Organisations may hold more than one community chest grant in a financial year, as long as their projects don't overlap. And the maximum grant for a community chest award is £1,000. Past examples of community chest grants include seated exercise classes for older residents in a hyperlocal area, a sustainable fashion fair, and swap shop to encourage environmentalism. As mentioned, there will also be an opportunity for small grassroots organisations to apply for Healthier Hackney funding via this grant. Last year, the Healthier Hackney grants made up part of the wider project grant programmes, for which we received many fantastic applications that are currently in delivery. The allocation for Healthier Hackney grants in the project scheme has all been used, but there are still funds available within the community chest grants for this coming year, 2024-25. The overall aim of the programme is to develop and test activities that support the least active residents in Hackney to build healthy physical activity habits and become more active. Building on what we have learnt from residents and local organisations, we are particularly looking to fund innovative approaches, collaboration, improving outcomes, sustainability, and place-based approaches. In terms of essential criteria and conditions, the application process will be the same as community chest applications, with some specific additional questions relating to health, but conditions and essential funding criteria are the same. Grantees will be expected to participate in the Public Health Community Champions programme as part of their Healthier Hackney funding. Over to you, Moyo.
Thank you, Sue. I'm not going to talk about our eligibility criteria. Our eligibility criteria is as follows. Organization must be not-for-profit. Organization must be value-driven and principally reinvest their surpluses to further social, environmental, or cultural objectives. These are typically the following types of organizations: registered charity or charitable incorporated organizations, charitable companies, companies limited by guarantee, social enterprises and community interest companies. These must have asset logs, be only not for profit and without share capital. Cooperative and community benefit society, unregistered community groups, structured groups of residents can apply for our community chest grants only. Private businesses and individuals are not eligible to apply for grant funding from this program. As mentioned before, at least 80% of the people benefiting from the funding request must be Hackney residents. Applicants must align with the program guidance for the scheme they are applying for, including start and end dates and the annual income criteria. That is very important. If applicants who have received a grant through this program in previous years have failed to fulfill the funding requirements of the previous grants, including return of required monitoring forms, they may not be eligible to apply for a grant. Next slide, please. Thank you. In addition to the general eligibility outlined previously, organization will also need to provide a number of documents along with the application, which will be used to conduct due diligence checks. This will vary slightly depending on the type of organization and also if you are a structured group of residents applying for community chest only. Generally, organization must first be registered with articles or constitution with clearly defined aims and objectives. Have an organization bank account. Where this is not possible, only for groups of residents, extra checks will be carried out before funding is released to an individual account. This only applies to applicants applying for community chest only. Annual accounts to show income and expenditure. In the case of smaller groups, a financial forecast to projection. Appropriate insurance and safeguarding policies. And as mentioned before, be able to demonstrate 80% of beneficiaries will be Hackney residents. I hand over to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Moyo. So this slide follows on from Moyo's eligibility, and this is what we can't fund. Ineligibility, exclusionary criteria. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but I have just highlighted some of the ones that we find are more applicable than others that are important to mention. So we can't fund and we won't accept applications for political or exclusively religious activities. However, applications from religious organisations are fine. We won't fund applications for an individual or where the individual clearly receives the main benefit. We won't fund overheads at rates that are materially in excess of those used to do similar work carried out by the organisation. That's a somewhat complicated way of saying that generally we won't fund very disproportionate overhead costs. We'd expect them not to exceed around 20% of the total value of your grant application, and you can outline those in your budgets when you make your application. We don't fund applications that are largely or significantly capital or building costs. This is revenue funding. It's not meant to be used towards infrastructure. However, you can apply for smaller, more insignificant capital costs if it directly relates to your funding ask, for example, like small white goods or, appliances or equipment to run your project, as long as it doesn't make up part of the cost, or a large part of the cost, I should say. We can't fund costs paid or liabilities incurred before the start date. That is another, seemingly formal way of saying that we're not going to fund any activity that you have already completed, that you have already paid for. This funding is for new expenses and new projects that your organisation wants to deliver. We don't typically fund activities that are undertaken outside of Hackney, as well as our beneficiaries. This funding is very much meant to be invested into our local communities. However, there's always some exceptions to these things. For example, if your project involves taking Hackney residents outside of the borough to access specialist courses or venues or trips, that is totally fine and completely understandable. And then just lastly, any costs that are not outlined in the grant application, and this is really just kind of communicating that this is restricted project-based funding, and so we need to know what we're going to fund, and then we agree on what we're going to fund there. So make sure that you include any costs in your budgets and in your application so that we can make those decisions and get that funding to you. So this is just to give you an overview of the journey that your application goes on. So we've got our little circular diagram here, and then a little bit more information broken down here on the assessment process. So obviously the first step is planning. So all of our guidance documents for each scheme have published on our website. We strongly recommend that you take the time to read them and understand all the resources. They are there solely to help you put in a good application. Our information sessions, they go over them in quite a lot of detail, as well as step-by-step application questions, which are also in the guidance documents. So, between those two things, there is so much information to support you with applying. Then once we get to our application stage, you make your applications online via our application portal ahead of the deadline. So we are unable to accept late applications. This is due to the sheer volume of applications that we get and the tight timelines that we hold ourselves to in assessing those and turning them around to get your funding agreements and payments to you. If you're experiencing any difficulties with the portal, please just contact us, ideally in plenty of time. We are available at our email address, which is later in the slide, and our phone number, and we're more than happy to help you troubleshoot those issues. Then we move on to our assessment stage. So once your application has been submitted, what we do as a grants team is we process this and we give it a once over to make sure it meets all the eligibility criteria. And there's no really clear errors on the application form. A clear error on the application form might be a start date or an end date. That is, not really, life doesn't really make any sense. or maybe is not within our eligibility start date and end dates, or it might be that the request amount is, you know, too high, it's not eligible, or maybe it looks a bit funny, it's too low, maybe you've put £10 instead of £1,000. So what we do is we look at that, we, you know, screen for those errors, and we contact applicants to confirm whether or not they're an error and whether or not we can, you know, update those and get those applications moving, or whether or not they are in fact ineligible. What we then do is, using those documents that you submitted to us, we conduct our due diligence checks. So this is where we verify that applicants kind of are who they say they are. We check things on Companies House, we check different policies. This is really important. There has been a huge influx in grant-related fraud, you know, since COVID. So this is a key part of our process. And again, if there's something missing there, we typically go back to organisations very quickly and ask them, or at least make sure that they know that we need to see that at some point. So your application is then passed on to a team of trained volunteer assessors. These volunteer assessors, they come from across the council, and they also come from representatives from the voluntary and community sector. We absolutely welcome and encourage volunteers from voluntary and community groups. And I'll give you some information on the last slide about how you could get involved with being an assessor and making funding decisions in this process. It is super important to have VCS voices and representation in this process. It really, really helps us to make good decisions. And then what happens is, so we assign assessors, and at least 2 assessors will look at every application, and they will review and score each application on their own. They'll then come together, they'll have a discussion about their applications, and they'll kind of moderate them, you know, give feedback, and, you know, make some recommendations prior to panel. All of our scoring criteria, so how assessors will score each question, are linked in our guidance documents. So you are absolutely encouraged to have a look at those so that you can see what makes a good answer and what makes not a good answer for a particular question, and, you know, use that to guide how you'd like to respond. Then assessors meet at a grants panel, and at that panel we decide on which applications will be funded. During this process, we might be in touch to ask additional clarifying questions. Something's not clear to an assessor, it's not clear at the panel, and it's the thing that, you know, is kind of between being funded and not funded. You know, it's our practice to go back and ask for clarifying information, as opposed to not asking that and just moving ahead in absence of that information. So just ensure that if we do send you anything, that you do respond to us as quickly as possible. And so that will really help us to make sure that we have the right information at decision making. And just to note that we are aware that Passover starts on the 22nd of April this year, and we'll ensure that any clarifying questions for our Orthodox Jewish community organisations happen prior to this. For children and young people, we have a really fantastic additional step where, after assessors have scored applications, those applications then go to a panel of young people, where over the course of the day, those young people discuss applications that they would like to see funded, and these recommendations are then brought back to the panel for discussion and steer. And so, again, we're really, really passionate about having our community voices play a part in decision making, and we absolutely welcome everyone here on the call today to get involved if they can. If you can't this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after. And I suppose it's just a note that we always fund more applications. We always receive more applications than we ever fund, I should say. So the assessors do make really difficult decisions, and it's really then important just to, you know, make sure that you're happy with the information you put in your application. And what we also have to take into account through this process is the kind of the spread of our funding geographically from an equalities lens, and that all helps us to make decisions about how we invest in the borough. When we make decisions after this panel, all applicants are notified irrespective of the decision. So all unsuccessful applicants are given the opportunity to have feedback from the team, and this happens usually through a phone call or a Zoom meet, or if you prefer written feedback, but everyone has the ability to get that bespoke feedback from what assessors said, what the panel said. And we do that to hopefully make sure that if you're unsuccessful, you know roughly why, and you can use that to inform any future applications you make to our funding or other funding. So I am just going to hand over to Sue.
Thanks for that, Caitlin. Brilliant, thank you. So this table here outlines the application periods and the closing dates that you're going to need to be aware of for the upcoming grants. Project grants are open from now until the 25th of March. Community Chest has a rolling deadline throughout the year. The first deadline will be the same, the 25th of March, but then there'll be further deadlines as each round comes in July, October and January. Project grants can start anytime after the 1st of April, and they have to complete within 1 year. For the children and young people grants, it can be 2 years. Oh, sorry, 1 year. Get this correct. 1 year for the children and young people grants and 2 years for project grants. So over the coming weeks, we'll be hosting further information sessions on the different grant schemes to go through the information in more detail, as well as to provide guidance to you on the application questions. So they are good for anyone who would like a step-by-step overview of submitting an application to us. So the session for Community Chest, that will go ahead this Thursday, the 8th of February at 2 p.m. And then next Thursday, we have project grants, that's at 11:30. And the children and young people grants, it's next Tuesday, the 13th of February. And all these sessions will be held online. They'll be recorded and the links will be available online after the event. So you can sign up and come along to the event. And then if you want to refresh yourself on what was said, the recordings are always there available for you. So passing to you, Tom.
Excellent, thanks, Sue. So this is a list of some of the key documents and resources available to help you, to support you with your applications. So our website will always contain the up-to-date information and links that you need, including any links to our application forms and where you can sign up to those info sessions, which I was just talking about. Our VCS prospectus also gives you an overview of the whole grants programme, as well as information about general eligibility. And there's also guidance documents to each grants programme, which includes a bit more information and guidance on the specific application questions, which is quite useful to go through when you're doing your application, so you get a bit more information about exactly what we're looking for. We've also compiled a document of information on general support available for VCS organisations, and we also have some resources on our website which you can use to help you with checking your policy documents, which helps our due diligence part of the application. We've also created some video resources to guide you through specific processes, including how to log on to the application portal. So there's also additional support available via our team and also through some partner organisations. So if you have any general questions about the programme, do let us know, and you can call us on that number or over that email as well. We're always happy to answer any questions. Hackney CVS are also able to provide bespoke application support through their organisational development team. The East London Business Alliance, also known as ELBA, are also able to offer an application review service where trained business volunteers can look through your applications and provide comments and feedback. Hackney CVS's and ELBA's application support services are completely free for VCS organisations to access. And as mentioned earlier, we're also recruiting volunteers from VCS to participate in the assessment process. It's a really good opportunity to kind of learn about the process, have your say in it, and as Caitlin said earlier, we'd really encourage anyone who's interested in that to apply. Let's see. So back over to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, just to build on that, so I've just added in, if you'd like to be an assessor or part of the decision making, or you know someone who would like to be, that is absolutely welcomed. You can read more about the role of assessors and express your interest there. If someone could pop from our team could pop that link in the chat, that would be fab. However, we'll of course send all that information around with our slide deck pack. And obviously, if you're here, you might be planning on applying for a grant. That's no problem at all. You know, as long as you fill in, we have a declaration of interest form where you can give information about the organisations that you might be representing, because we're where people represent multiple. And as long as we know that, what we can do is work around that and manage those potential conflicts of interests. And that might typically look like, you know, if you've applied for a project grant, we might pop you on the CYP fund. If you've applied for a CYP grant, we might pop you on the project or community chest. Or even if we can't mitigate that, we'll just make sure that you're not assessing an application you might have a conflict of interest in. And at that decision-making panel, you'll be asked to leave the meeting for the part where we're assessing your application. So other assessors on the call feel like they can speak freely. Right, so short and sweet, that's the end of our session for today. I'm going to quickly stop recording, and then what we have is time for any questions that people might have. I've got one question there from Eligbility that I will come to in a second.